Well, hello everyone. Good evening and welcome back for our final reading of Gifted. Gifted. I've been enjoying this book. It's a nice little read through. There's been a lot going on. We've had our main protagonist, Cal, as he has journeyed through some trials and tribulations and has come out on the other side. I don't know that you could say he's come out stronger on the other side, but he's come out on the other side at least. I mean, I wanna say he's been dead, he's, been shot, he's turned into zombie-ish type things, and all sorts of fun stuff that he has gotten himself into. And now we're gonna be coming to the end of this book. Now, this is book 1. There is not, at this point in time, a book 2. But if you've been enjoying the book, I hope you would consider, following the author, subscribing if he has a newsletter out there. I'm not sure if he has a newsletter out there. And being on the lookout for his next book when it comes our way. Excuse me. Because it should be good when it finally happens for us. So, I hope you are excited for it to come, as I will be excited for it to come. And of course, you can always go back and listen to Gifted. You could also choose to go and purchase the book from the author. It is available on Amazon. Link should be in your descriptions. If you don't see it on Twitch or Kick, that's because it doesn't let me put links because there aren't descriptions. But YouTube and X should both have. No, X might not have it. It'll be in the post I put up on X, and YouTube will have it there. So you can always get out there and make sure that you are supporting this author with his current and future endeavors. So let's talk a little bit about what happened last time. And, just as a quick overview, we found out that Cal was the son of the Grand Inquisitor. Grandson. He is the son of somebody he actually killed after he was already dead. His real name is Callus. And he is actually half Davan. Half Davan, half Eudos. The son of the Grand Inquisitor, or the Lord Inquisitor, I should say. The son of the Lord Inquisitor and the previous Gyfted. Very exciting, is it not? And they managed to cut the third chain, and then Cal pretty much died, was brought back to life, and then lost 6 months of his life. During that 6 months, Ovet took him back to Igni. And so that was where he woke up 6 months later in their little hideout in Igni. Ovet had been taking care of Leif, who, for all intents and purposes, lost his memory. He is thinking that things are back before the orphanage originally got attacked at the beginning of the book. Although it is not the case. He has a moment of lucidity in which he tells Cal a little bit about himself. He's so happy that Cal and Ovet are there. He does verify that Cal was the son of the Lord Inquisitor's son, so the Lord Inquisitor's grandson, that Leif actually used to be the Lord Inquisitor. That was news. Um, and that he had had something in his desk for Cal that he had never gotten around to giving to him. But unfortunately, at the end of our reading, Leif has passed away. And sadly enough, that is the case. But it is where we will start out our reading tonight. So we will be starting out with chapter 33. We've got chapter 33, 34, 35, and an epilogue to read tonight. So we will get through those. This may be a little bit shorter of a stream than normal because we've only got that little bit. It was too much to read last time. It may be a little short for this time for what I would normally read, but I live in a world of reality and I take what I can get. And frankly, I have a lot of voiceover work that I need to do, so having a little bit of extra time back may not be a bad thing for me. But for all of you, if you are ready, we will get ready to get started ourselves. Again, as a reminder, if you have missed any of the reading, you can catch all of the previous chapters at youtube.com/@SirArminius. If you want to pick up the book, you can pick up the book on Amazon. Gyfted, Gyfted by D.W. Lewis. Hey, you see the cover right over there next to me. Um, so you can always get out there and get the book on your own to be able to read in or catch any of the replays that I have available on the YouTube channel at your listening convenience. But now it is time for us to go ahead and get ourselves started. So, everybody, sit back, relax, grab yourself a cup of coffee, a nice warm blanket, whatever you may need, so that this night can be the best it can be for all of you. And then you can sit back, relax, and prepare to enjoy as we dive into our next chapters of Gyfted, starting with 33. Cal's knuckles whitened around the hilt of Leif's shattered sword. Are you sure? Ovette stood beside him, her arm wrapped around his. He ran his finger along the edge of the remaining sliver of metal. Blood welled from the cut, still sharp, still ready to do what it was made to do, even broken. I'm sure, he said. It was never mine to begin with. I stole it from Leif. Thought I could fix all of the world's problems by fighting. Stole it from a cupboard that was never unlocked? Ovette chuckled to herself. Not one of joy or mirth, but realization. Leif knew exactly what you were going to do. Even as a child, you were always fighting or stealing. How could he not know? It feels like all that happened to a different person, different life. Well, do you have any idea what you're going to do with the life you have now? Yeah, I do. Cal placed the remains of the sword on Leif's chest and crossed his withered arms over the blade. A few moments later, Ovette stepped forward and lit the pyre with her gift. The white flames licked at the base of the wood before catching. As Cal stepped back, he entwined his fingers with Ovette's, watching as the sword hilt began to glow dull red, the color holding for a moment before shifting to a soft yellow, then finally flaring white-hot. He kept his gaze locked onto what remained of Leif's sword, not daring to tear his eyes away as the obsidian blade melted into the wood. At least he's at peace now. Ovette had turned her head to the side. She squeezed Cal's fingers as she smiled at empty air. A presence brushed Cal's awareness, one not unlike the dread but unique in its own way. It brought him a sense of comfort, and for the briefest of moments, he swore he could feel the eyes of those he'd lost staring at him. The presence vanished just as soon as it appeared. They both stood and watched in silence as the flames consumed the pyre. Behind the tip of the flames, Sanctum's spire loomed in the distance. Over time, Cal's focus shifted from the burning wood to the Daven monolith that had dominated the horizon for as long as he could remember. His blackened fingers twitched as he glared at it, his brow knitted tighter. Sanctum spire. There's a chain inside, right? There is. You said you felt the dread's presence there? More than anywhere else here in Eudos. Cal's chest rose and fell with steady rhythm. The grief that had held firm for the last few days receded. All that remained was focus, resolve. He understood what he needed to do. Leif had shown him. He'd stared at the damned thing for days on end. He let go of Ovet's hand and strode toward Leif's ruined study. The wall he'd once climbed through had crumbled, and a thick layer of ash had settled on the writing desk. Memories bubbled to the surface, of being scolded for stealing, of gentle hands applying ointment to cuts and bruises, and the warmth he felt as he listened to Leif's voice. The warmth faded with the memories, replaced instead by a pull, a longing to be reclaimed. Something in the room was calling to him. Cal shoved aside the desk and pried open the floorboards, revealing a long bundle of blue cloth lying hidden beneath, the fabric frayed with age. A fleeting sense of belonging crested over him as he pulled the bundle out of the floor. Half-formed images of a woman's smile, the rough calluses of a strong hand brushing against his cheek. "What is it?" Ovid asked, appearing in the hole that served as the study's new doorway. Cal peeled back the cloth, revealing the broken pieces of an obsidian sword. It bore a striking resemblance to Leif's, but differed in subtle ways. The hilt was simple and functional. The blade's fuller ran from hilt to tip, giving it a rather pointed appearance, more so than normal. He slipped his fingers around the old leather wrappings of the blade's hilt and tested the weight. It was perfect, as if designed for his hand, as if waiting to be held by him. He stared in awe at the blade, aligning the pieces in his mind's eye. Huel's smithy. Did it survive? I think so. Why? Cal unsheathed Lady Havisham's dagger, placing it with the pieces of his father's sword, and then rewrapped the blue cloth with care. I think it's about time I had a sword of my own. Don't you? Huel's smithy had survived the volcano's destruction. The man himself was nowhere to be found, and a thick film of dust and ash had settled over nearly everything. Cal stepped over to the furnace and poked the coals with a set of prongs that had been hanging on the wall. The top stones crumbled under the prodding, having been left exposed to the elements for years, but the quality of the ones that lay beneath satisfied him. They'd do for his purpose. The only obstacle was lighting the damned thing. Here, let me, Ovet said, as if reading Cal's mind as he stared into the coal pit. With a flick of her wrist, she dropped a mote of flame into the center. The coals ignited, as though they'd been waiting all these years for a chance to serve again. Thanks. Cal tucked his shirt into his breeches and donned the protective leather vest and apron. They pinched and hugged in once smaller areas, but it felt good to wear them again. When he turned, Ovette had propped herself against the open wooden doorway that led into Huel's shop. She smiled at him and nodded. Suits you. Cal allowed a smile to jerk up the corner of his mouth. It had been a long time since he'd smithed anything. A long time indeed since he'd given himself over to the rhythmic clang of hammer and steel. He swept ash and dust from a nearby table and laid down the bundle of cloth. First order of business would be separating the hilts from both blades and then melting those blades down. The room had everything he'd need to hammer, bend, shape, sharpen, and grind. He flexed his grip around the 10-pound hammer. It felt good, felt right. Removing the hilt of a blade was simple enough task. He unbound the leather, then gave the handguard a few gentle knocks with the heavy hammer, each thud sending vibrations through the handle. A few more precise taps with a lighter hammer, and the hilt slipped free. The dagger proved stubborn, slipping from its angled position more than once to nick Cal's fingers and wrist, but he didn't mind. Embers flicked upward and coals cracked as Cal pushed the naked blades, pieces and all, into the furnace. More dust and ash kicked up as he worked the bellows. He watched as the metal lightened to a yellow that sat on the cusp of being white. He recalled Artie's attempts at heating Leif's blade with gift fire, and how it had refused to heat past a certain point. His father's sword acted no differently, even with the extra pulls on the bellows. "Ovette, I need you to heat the metal," he said, not turning away from the furnace. More instruction than request for aid. Ovette obeyed without complaint, stepping forward with her hand aloft. She winced at the rising heat, but summoned a white flame the size of a small apple and dropped it inside. The deep red coals blazed into a vibrant white. Ovette stepped back, hands raised to shield her face, but Cal held his ground. Tongues of white flame wrapped around the heated metal, pushing the hue from yellow to white. He collected the now pliable metal into a large pot that sat in the furnace's center, the pieces bending and pulling together. Wasting no time, he positioned a clay mold atop a sand-filled wooden shaft and carefully poured the molten metal inside. Once done, he carried the full mold over to a large barrel of water. The water hissed and squeaked from the sheer intensity of the heat being plunged into its depths. The wood of the barrel groaned, and for a moment, Cal was worried it would break. Separating the clay mold from cooled metal had always been one of Cal's favorite parts of forging, and this time was no different. He chipped away at the mold, revealing the indistinct shape of a longsword. It was dull gray with curious streaks of white. The edges were rough and jagged, the flat uneven and lumpy. But such things held promise. He set to the grinding wheel in the corner of the workshop. Slow, steady grinds worked out the blade's flawed edge. Cal lost himself in the work. For a time, he forgot all about the chains, the Davins, the loss. Forgot his grief. The work was good, simple, sure. It had an end he could predict, steps he could follow. The smell and heat of the forge blocked out any doubt he had about himself. Once he was satisfied with the edge of the blade, he plunged it back into the furnace. He waited long enough for the dull gray to deepen into a bronze, just shy of red. The white streaks he'd noted earlier refused to darken like the blade around them. Instead, they grew more vibrant the longer they sat in the furnace, reacting to Ovette's fire. They arched and screamed through the metal, like a bolt of lightning caught in a single moment of time. Cal pulled the blade from the furnace again, held it up, and inspected the edges and flat for any lumps or blemishes. The work was good. The edges were true and the flat even. He set the blade aside. It could be sharpened to a razor's edge soon enough, but first it had to cool. During the time Cal had spent forging the blade, Ovette had pulled a stool into the open doorway and drifted off to sleep. Soot and ash streaked her white skin, but the red and orange of the forge's glow softened her features. There was no need to wake her. Her part in the forging was done, though Cal wished her part in all of this could end. If the sanctum chain was anything like the others, then he'd need her to bond with it, just as she had with the rest. The thought soured his mood. He distracted himself by tearing the blue cloth that had held his father's sword into strips. Even amid the thick melange of forge smell, the scent of something he'd long forgotten paused him. a scent he had no name for, but one that plucked at strings in his chest. He didn't recognize it, yet it brought on a primal sense of comfort. He thought of the orphanage, thought of the warm cubby holes and noisy chaos of the littles, of Lady Havisham's chidings, of Ovette, Shay, Jord, and Artie. He breathed the scent in deep and wove the strips of blue cloth around the leather bindings, wrapping them both around the hilt. The blade had cooled to a familiar obsidian hue, the flat swallowing the light of the forge, whereas the white streaks pulsed with dim life. Cal worked out the final kinks, sharpening the blade to a razor finish, and knocked the hilt back into place. The dull clunk of the hammer startled Ovette awake, and she swayed on her stool. She steadied herself and stared at the finished sword. "Are you going to give it a name?" she asked, not looking at him. "I hadn't thought about it. Never given a sword a name before." "I thought all swords had fancy names given by their owners. What was Leif's called?" "I don't know." Guilt pricked him. He'd held that blade for years, near a decade, yet had never stopped for a moment to think that Leif might have named it. "It's important," Ovette continued. "You should give it a name." Cal thought for a second, coming up blank. "I'm no good at these things." He shook his head and set the sword down, deciding to put the finishing touches to a leather sheath that had been left over from Huel's supply. "You can name it if you like." Ovette traced a finger along the blade's length. The white streaks brightened under her touch. "I've got the perfect name." She held the blade out for Cal to sheath and smiled. "Hollowborn." "Well, that is a name, isn't it?" "Hello, everyone. Welcome on in. Glad to have you guys here with me. Welcome in for our final reading of Gyfted by D.W. Lewis. One chapter down, several chapters left to go, and possibly a shorter stream than normal tonight, but we'll see what these next couple of chapters bring. Of course, as we come to our end here, I will take a moment to remind you that subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can go catch all of the previous chapters and all of tonight's chapters a little bit later tonight. Once the stream ends, I will put all the rest of them up there. Support the author, D.W. Lewis. You can find his book on Amazon. And then starting on Tuesday, we will start our next book, which will be The Sentinel Project by, I want to say the last name is Sorensen. I'm so bad about the names when it comes to some of these. Come join me on Tuesday. You'll see the nice book cover next to me as we start our read into The Sentinel Project. But now, let's go ahead and continue with Gyfted by D.W. Lewis as we move into 34. The wagon bobbed and shook down the country road. Traveling via land wasn't the fastest way to arrive anywhere in Udos, but Cal figured it was their best chance of getting to Sanctum Spire unhindered. Since the Davan Empire had tightened its grip on the Uden people, both figuratively and literally in some cases, refugees from all the major cities had started making their way to the realm's central city. At first, Cal had been worried their faces would be recognized by checkpoint guards or the other travelers. But the journey had been uneventful. Only 3 such checkpoints stood between Igni and Sanctum, the sprawling city that ringed Sanctum Spire. He would have found this suspicious, save for the wagon driver explaining that Sanctum had been targeted by a number of terrorist attacks in recent months, and although the city was on high alert, the constant stream of refugees meant cheap labor. This logic struck Cal as flawed. More refugees meant more risk of rebels slipping through, exactly what he and Ovette were attempting to do. Still, he wasn't about to question their good fortune for once. They'd need every scrap of it before the day was out. The driver himself was as nondescript and crowd blending as they came. A more suspicious person might have taken his appearance as crafted, intentional. But Ovett had assured Cal that he was just too used to seeing the worst in people. She'd paid the driver up front with what little money they had saved from their hideout and the few coins that were left in the orphanage. It had been enough to secure passage to the city walls, but beyond that, they were on their own. At least they rode alone. Crates of food and an array of closed barrels were their only companions. That would make things easier if the wagon were stopped and searched. "We're really doing this, huh?" Ovett said, her head rolling in step with the wagon's slow trot. "We're really about to take the fight right to Cius's front door." "What other choice do we have?" Cal replied, leaning back and looking at the passing scenery, trying and failing to enjoy the calm before the storm, the looming threat of danger never too far off. "Do you remember anything from your time there?" he asked, still not breaking his gaze away from the peaceful countryside. "I remember feeling like I was being watched, all the time. The dread's presence was constant within the spire, similar to how I felt around the chains, only much worse. Like its presence was physical, oppressive." Ovett fell quiet, and Cal turned his gaze back into the wagon. "Well, at least we know we're heading in the right direction," he said, the reassurance he'd intended to convey falling flat. Ovett dropped her gaze and breathed. "Cal, are you going to be all right near Sanctum's chain? The dread, it might try to take control of you again." The thought had occurred to him, but he might be the biggest danger to this little suicide run of theirs. Part of him questioned why they were even making this journey. Ovett had used her gift in Igni, healing him, aiding Leif in his passing, and the Lord Inquisitor hadn't sent in his hunters. It was as if they were no longer worth taking note of, no longer a threat. "Do you remember when we first found our secret spot?" The question caught Ovett off guard, clearly not the answer she had been expecting. "I do," she said, recovering and leaning back against the wagon's side with a faint smile. "You were running away from Lady Havisham. I can't remember why, but I do remember you jumping at every shadow, thinking she was going to leap out and grab you." "I remember you, crying when I told you I was going to run away. You begged me to stay. Told me if I just said I was sorry, that she'd forgive me. Made me promise to always tell the truth." The memory tugged at the corners of his lips. "Really does feel like a lifetime ago, doesn't it?" "Who would have thought we'd end up here? Criminal stowaways in some beat-up wagon." "You grow up to be a criminal?" Ovett smirked. "Never would have guessed." Cal laughed, the sound rough and real, coming from his center. He tilted his head back, his gaze drifting toward the horizon, to the new chains that speared distant ground. "We caused this." His smile faded, the weight of the view dragging in his voice. "For 8 years, killing was all I knew. I was so obsessed with surviving, so driven by my need for revenge, that I never stopped to consider the lives of those around me. Lives that were barely worth living. Udens, Hollowborn and Giftling alike, stumbling through each day, hoping to stay invisible, following without question, never knowing that they too deserved a choice that Cius and the chains took away from them, that I took away from them. I can't atone for what I've done, from the person I became in my need for vengeance, but I'll not turn a blind eye to their suffering any longer. It's my responsibility to clean up my mess. I won't lie and say I'm not afraid, but whatever happens, we'll handle it." Ovette finished. Cal looked at her. Together. Ovette's smile ran up to her eyes. I'm proud of you, Cal. A warm blush prickled his cheeks, but he laughed it off. You're starting to sound like Leif. So are you. Cal turned his head back to the horizon. No, I just don't feel like running anymore. The jostle of the wagon shook Cal awake. Lamplight bled through the tarp drawn over the wagon's frame. Night had fallen, though he didn't remember falling asleep. Ovette's head rested in his lap, her breathing calm and slow. He nudged her awake as the cart rolled to a stop. She stirred, blinking and rubbing away the remnants of sleep, recognition dawning across her features. We're here, called the wagon driver. Cal pulled back the section of tarp that separated them from the driver's seat. He opened his mouth, readying his question, but the sight of the city stunned him into silence. The innards of Sanctum City sprawled before him. Uniform white blocks of all different sizes were placed on top of one another. Dim light shone through some of the walls' small black holes. Were they domiciles? Warehouses? There was no way to tell. This is as close to Sanctum Spire as I can get you. The driver jerked a thumb toward a broad causeway that bisected the structures, large enough for a fleet of wagons, or citizens to travel in both directions. Afraid you'll have to walk the rest of the way. Sanctum Spire rose beyond the causeway. Its surface was etched with the same runes that marked the chains anchored into its flanks, runes that glowed in unsettling unison. Armor clinked at the base of the spire, Sanctum's prefects readying to meet this lone wagon. Cal and Ovette climbed out of the wagon and stared at the driver, their confusion written clean across their faces. The man smirked with an untrustworthy grin. Lord Dredge says good luck. Before Cal could respond, the driver spurred on his horse and the wagon lurched away. A voice barked from the gathered prefects. Curfew's in effect. All citizens are to return to their homes immediately. The voice rang with a command, not a warning, a threat. Cal slid Hollowborn free from its sheath on his back and turned around to greet them. Ovette lined her hands with flickering white flame. You know who we are, Cal called out, making sure his words were loud and clear. You know why we're here. Let us pass, and no harm will come to you. Ovette edged closer to Cal. The causeway offered little in the way of cover. Cal recognized the long wooden weapons that a few of the lead prefects held. Disc, barrel, and consequence. His heart thumped as the seconds dragged by. He stepped forward, holding his weapon out to the side, arms open. Ovette followed, matching his pace. The guards didn't react. The tension between them held. Cal took another step forward, and then another. Soon they were walking forward at a slow, cautious pace. Long gift-arm barrels trembled in the prefects' grips. Their brands flickered with uncertain command. Their swords remained snug in their sheaths. It wasn't hatred or a sense of duty that kept their weapons up. It was fear. The prefects parted as Cal and Ovette drew closer, allowing them to pass through. Cal braced for a knife in his back, for one of the prefects to tip over the edge. But they didn't. They watched, hollow-eyed, as Cal and Ovette reached Sanctum Spire's towering doors. Are you ready? Cal kept his gaze on Ovette, but tracked the crowd in his periphery. Ovette's fists were clenched in grim resolve, and something malicious flashed across her features. I'm ready, she answered, the words cold and hard. Cal knew that look all too well. It had stared back at him for nearly a decade. With a final breath, Cal placed his hands on the doors and pushed. And that was 34. Which means Our next chapter is 35. Are you guys ready? Questions, comments, concerns? No? Then let's go ahead and dive on in to our next chapter. 35. The majesty of Sanctum Spire's inner hall was lost on Cal. His focus had narrowed on the end goal, leaving little care for the grand hall that made up the entire interior. His footsteps punctuated the mausoleum-like silence. Still air parted in his and Ovette's wake, as though their presences disturbed sacred ground. Sanctum's chain dominated the center of the hall. It dwarfed the other chains in size, grand and magnificent. The sheer intensity of it was unnerving, the slight sway and gentle clink of its links almost melodic, hypnotizing. The dread's corruption squirmed beneath Cal's skin as he tracked the chain's ascent, running so high that it seemed to collect at a central point far off in what should have been the sky. Something scratched at the base of his skull. It sent a shiver through his shoulder blades. The hairs on his neck stood on end. Whispers brushed his ears, full of loathing, hatred, and the desire to see him fall. They grew louder and bolder with every step. Lord Inquisitor Sius stood on a raised dais in front of the chain. Another figure, statuesque in its stillness, waited a few paces ahead. The shiver in Cal's shoulders shifted and crawled its way down his spine. He gripped Hollowborn tight, flicked the point to adjust his sweaty grip, and forced himself to breathe. Beside him, Ovette shook with rage. White veins crawled up her neck and over her chin. They poked at the corners of her mouth, pulsing with energy. Her hands were already lined with the faint glow of gift. "It would seem I underestimated your conviction, Callus." The Lord Inquisitor's voice boomed off the chamber's walls. "I had hoped, in time, that you would have come to view things with perspective." His heavily armored boots thudded into the stone as he descended the stairs to the central dais. "I suppose it's too much to hope that you've come here to surrender." Cal responded with a glare. His anger welled inside his chest, the flames fanned by every word the Lord Inquisitor spoke. "Pity." The Lord Inquisitor placed his hand on the pauldron of the statuesque figure. "No doubt you've seen the Dread's response to your actions. You need to but look outside to see the consequences of your so-called heroics. The Dread was content with what little gift Eudos had to offer, content with my allowing my forces to safeguard the Uden people. By ensuring their survival, I could have supplied my master with a never-ending supply of sustenance, kept the full might of its will at bay. But you have undone centuries of work. You have unleashed upon this realm a being far above you or I." The whispers in Cal's head grew louder, pushing and probing deeper into his mind. He resisted and held fast, bracing himself for the force of the Dread. But it never came. The whisper's tones changed to mockery, taunting him. The statuesque figure jerked its head toward Cal. The movement was wrong, too precise, puppet-like. The Lord Inquisitor grinned at Cal's resistance. "Did Hephaestus tell you of your father, boy? Of how he betrayed me and his family's good name? How he harbored a child with that filthy Uden Gyfted?" He stopped, passing his contemptuous gaze from Cal to the figure clad in black armor. The Lord Inquisitor's hand. Its armor bore several grooves and slashes across the gauntlets. A thin line where the chest plate had been repaired glinted a far duller hue than the emblazoned golden spire, marring what would otherwise have been perfection.
Corsius, remove your helmet. Let your son get a good look at you.
The hand did as its master bade. With the same puppet-like movement, it removed its helmet. Bile burned the bottom of Cal's throat. His father's corpse stared back at him. Black veins bulged beneath gray-blue skin, discolored by small splotches of purple bruising. Void dark eyes held no light, no signs of life or recognition. Yet Cal felt their gaze, felt the anger and fettered resolve that leaked from his father.
Magnificent, isn't he?
The Lord Inquisitor regarded his son as a sculptor would a work of art.
In life, he was a force to be reckoned with, second to none in terms of martial prowess. The pride of Sanctum Inquisitor Aureus. And yet,
He turned his gaze to Ovette, meeting her growing anger with a fresh look of contempt.
he fell in love, squandered his potential, and listened instead to the rebellious mutterings of that traitorous Hephaestus.
His words came quick, spitting hatred and the pain of betrayal in equal measure.
How is that doddering old fool still whiling away his twilight hours in that pit of an orphanage?
He's dead. Ovette's voice shook. The white veins had climbed a little farther up her face, and the whites of her eyes glowed with subtle vibrancy. Her reply took the Lord Inquisitor by surprise. Shock flickered across his features, but it was soon replaced with smug satisfaction.
Regrettable, although not entirely undeserved. Did he ever tell the story of how he betrayed me? How he threw everything we built together away? Turned my own son against me?
Cal bit back his anger. Leif's death still held raw and tight around his heart, but he clung tighter to the promise he'd made. A glance at Ovette revealed crackling gift fire in her palms. Her promise to Leif was far from her mind.
And now his lies and his deceit turn my grandson against me as well. How did he sway you to his side so easily? How did he convince others to do his dirty work for him?
The Lord Inquisitor's expression made it clear these weren't genuine questions, but barbs meant to sting. They carried the weight of a man whose adoration had turned to disdain, yet lacked their intended bite.
Coward that he was.
Ovette's hands burst into flame, and she hurled her gift fire at the Lord Inquisitor. Corsius moved in a flash, redirecting the flames into a nearby column. He fell on Ovette with silent precision. In response, Cal dashed forward, Hullaborn singing a note of defiance as it locked itself against his father's obsidian blade. Hullaborn suited Cal better than any sword he'd held, as though it were an extension of his will. Leif's, on the other hand, had always resisted him, despite his many years wielding it. He angled Hullaborn's tip up and around Corsius's guard, digging the point into his metallic pauldron. The maneuver lacked power, but it was enough to make Corsius pull back, enough for Cal to push Ovette out of the way and square off against his reanimated father. Their previous fights flashed through his mind. The stabbing outside the orphanage, the ferocity Cal had shown during their fight at the Yundis safe house, and finally, their fight in the Yundis Citadel. Something had possessed Cal in each of those moments. He'd written it off as battle fury and survival instinct, but the same essence now seeped from Corsius's armor. Faint wisps of shadow curled between the plates. Had the dread aided Cal in those moments? If so, why would a god see fit to ensure his survival? Corsius didn't let Cal finish his thought. He pressed his advance, bringing up his blade for a powerful overhead strike. Cal emptied his mind. Thoughts were a distraction, and distractions meant death. He no longer had the dread's aid, corruption or otherwise, but he didn't need it. He had his own brand of fury. Cal passed a strike over his head, then slashed at Corsius's leg plating. If his father felt the impact, he gave no indication. An elbow smashed into Cal's temple, sending him stumbling and his vision swimming. He whipped Hollowborn out in a wide arc, the swing not granting him the space he'd hoped for. Corsius pressed his attack again. Cal moved on instinct. He bat aside one blow with a jarring parry near Hollowborn's hilt, barely holding onto the hilt as the room still swam around him. He twisted away from the following strike, and Corsius's blade slashed through the air an inch from his cheek. The movement threatened to topple Cal, his feet finding clumsy purchase on the stone beneath him. As Corsius moved to take advantage of Cal's unbalance, a mote of gift fire erupted between them, sending both men toppling back. Cal hit the ground hard.
Insolent child!
The Lord Inquisitor cried, sweeping his sword from its scabbard. Ovette darted back, gift burning around her form like wildfire. She moved faster than Cal had ever seen, ducking and weaving through the Lord Inquisitor's strikes, her former guardian's blade stabbing at nothing but air. She was graceful, deadly. The hem of her tunic billowed as if she were performing an elaborate dance. She lashed out with her gift, a roar of white flame that would have sundered her opponent's armor had he not cut through it at the last second. As graceful as her movements were, Ovette's face was pure hatred. She wasn't fighting to survive. She was fighting to maim, to hurt, to make the Lord Inquisitor suffer. Cal knew that fire. He'd felt that same heat. It burned bright. It burned short. Despite Ovette's display, the Lord Inquisitor didn't panic. He parried, he countered, and waited. Ovette's dance was one of emotion, raw and exposed. His dance was one of discipline and the quick skill of long practice. Cal returned his attention to his father, striking the side of his head with Hollowborn. The lines of gift in the blade flashed white as it cracked into Corsius's decayed skull. Black ichors oozed from the wound, reeking of bitter herbs and the rot of the grave. The stench and heat assaulted Cal's senses as he locked blades with his father. Cal braced for the expected push, but his father twisted hard instead, wrenching Hollowborn aside in the process. Cal held on, barely, but he couldn't bring his blade back up in time. Pain blazed through Cal's leg as a deep gash opened behind his knee. His muscles trembled, and bone ground against bone as he adjusted his weight, but he clenched his teeth and forced himself to stand firm. Corsius pressed the advantage, swinging and thrusting out at the same spot, putting Cal on the defensive. Each time he brought Hollowborn up to counter, his father's blade was already elsewhere, too fast to keep track of. Desperate, Cal threw his weight forward, pain barking with the effort. The sudden lunge forced Corsius's next strike short, and he buckled under his son's advance. The two crashed and rolled on the ground in a tangle of limbs and armor. Struggling, Cal wrestled for leverage, then brought Hollowborn's pommel down on his father's nose. Bone and cartilage gave way with a sickening squelch, the rotten tissue beneath giving way beneath the blow. Something warm pressed against Cal's chest. He looked down to see a brand shimmering on the back of Corsius's hand. A brand he didn't recognize. In one moment it pulsed with energy, and in the next, a sharp thump punted him into a column, driving the air from his lungs. The next strike followed instantly. Cal rolled aside, his chest burning, and Corsius's blade bit stone instead of flesh. The effort left Cal sprawled, coughing mouthfuls of blood onto the tiles. Corsius showed no sign of injury or fatigue. He repositioned and then sent his blade sweeping in a vicious arc toward Cal's exposed neck. Cal caught it on Hollowborn, pushed off with his feet, and drove his blade forward. The streaks of gift captured in Hollowborn flared with intensity, and Corsius's howl split the air as the blade sank into his chest. Cal didn't wait to see if the blow had been enough to drop his father. He tore his sword free and sprinted to Yvette's side, ignoring the pleas in his leg. Sweat gleamed across her forehead, blood spotting her tunic. The Lord Inquisitor's armor bore fresh scorch marks where her gift had connected, but the smirk curling his lips said it all. He'd been toying with her. Seeing Cal approach, the Lord Inquisitor moved. Too fast. He dipped under Yvette's guard and cracked her chin with the handguard of his blade, snapping her head back. Before she could recover, he locked his arm around her throat and held her tight.
Stop right where you are.
Spittle landed on Yvette's cheek as he snarled.
Just as obedient as your father, never listening to the reason of your betters. I am this realm's steward. I am all that stands between these pathetic people and the dread. And I will not have any more of my family stand against me. I gave you the option to serve at my side, but there are other ways to make you obedient.
The Lord Inquisitor's gaze flicked past Cal.
Corsius, on your feet. I have not permitted you to fall.
A rasping groan escaped Corsius as he pushed himself up behind Cal, the plates of his armor clanking with the movement.
Your son is of no use to the dread alive. End him. Now.
Corsius ignored the Lord Inquisitor's command. For a heartbeat, he stood motionless, his void dark eyes locked onto Cal's.
Corsius, do as I command!
His sword hilt with both hands, one above the other. Fingers settling into a familiar grip. He raised the blade upright and pressed his forehead against the flat of the steel.
Corsius!
The Lord Inquisitor bellowed, the veins in his temple bulging. His father remained frozen in his salute. Images of Leif ripped open his locked cabinet in a panic flooded Cal's mind. Of the calmness that moved through his body as he'd taken out his sword and held it in the same fashion. Cal eased his stance, sword held ready but unmoving. Behind him, he could hear the screams of the Lord Inquisitor, the pitch of his voice breaking as he commanded his father into action. Amid the din, another memory bubbled to the surface. One more recent, that still held a rawness to it. Cal pictured Leif lying in his bed, his milky eyes closed, his withered hands clasped around Cal's and Yvette's, one on top of the other, held tight against his chest. Cal choked as he stared at the corpse statue of his father, a man he had never known and would never come to know. It was harder than he wanted to admit, harder than swinging Hollowborn, harder than facing the overwhelming presence of the chains, harder than surviving battle after battle. Cal dropped his stance, shifted his weight, and forced his face to remain calm despite the throbbing in his leg. He gripped Hollowborn with both hands, one above the other, brought the blade up, and pressed his forehead against the cold metal. Silence hung between the two warriors, between mirrored father and son. Then the moment broke. Corsius lowered his blade and held it to the side, open. Cal drew one sharp breath and charged. Hollowborn angled forward. The blade punctured Corsius's armor, rent aside decayed flesh, and plunged into his chest.
No!
The Lord Inquisitor's voice rang out across the hall. The sound cracked like aging wood, filled with pain and hatred. Coughing black ichor across his chest plate, Corsius gripped the edges of the blade and thrust it deeper into himself. Whispers exploded in Cal's head, screaming in pain and terror. An alien fear washed over his body. He tracked that fear to its source, drove his blade forward, and felt a rending, not of decayed flesh and brittle bone, but of connection, of a dark link that cried out in agony as Hollowborn's gift flashed. The whispers ceased. Corsius fell to his knees. Cal caught the back of his head as the body went limp, as Corsius's void, dark eyes dulled. His grim expression softened. The crackle of shadow in the veins that marred gray-blue skin faded.
What have you done?
Cal's focus snapped back into the room, to the cries of Ovette as the Lord Inquisitor shoved her down, his blade poised above her neck.
You know nothing of what the dread will take from you.
A vein throbbed in the Lord Inquisitor's temple, pulsing with each word he spat and breath he heaved.
I'll teach you about real pain.
Cal wrenched Hollowborn free from his father's chest. His anguished cry competed with the Lord Inquisitor's own. The room slowed as he charged. The gift locked in Hollowborn dimmed, the glow guttering as shadows coiled around the blade. What happened next defied Cal's understanding. He stretched out his hand, closed his eyes, and willed the distance between him and the Lord Inquisitor to close. His stomach lurched from the burst of inertia, but he swallowed the bile rising in his throat and drove Hollowborn's tip into the Lord Inquisitor's gut. Pain blossomed in his own as the Lord Inquisitor's blade found new purchase. Gift fire engulfed them both, setting Cal's skin alight. His skin bubbled and melted. The blood in his limbs ignited. The acrid smell of burnt meat assaulted what remained of his senses. White light shone over him as he came to rest on the floor. He felt the wet release of blood splatter over his stomach as the Lord Inquisitor's blade was pulled out. His skin cracked and a fresh gout of pain bounded throughout his body. But the light continued its work. It wrenched his twisted bones back into place, knitted and sealed his charred skin back together. The blurry form of Ovette hovered over him, her white hair flowing as if blown by an unfelt wind. Her words were muffled and indistinct, but the following scream cut through the haze of pain. The Lord Inquisitor cried in agony as Ovette unleashed a torrent of white flame upon him. Cal watched, horrified, as the man's armor twisted and buckled, liquefied by the intense heat, fusing with the flesh beneath. Ovette's face remained locked in anger, showing no remorse for her actions. Her white flames had wreathed her entire body, so intense they made the air shimmer and warp around her. With arms that felt like water, Cal tried to push himself up, groaning as he stretched and burnt skin tore anew. He crawled toward Ovette, each movement undoing the healing she'd just administered. "Ovette!" he groaned, his throat dry and his voice a cracked whisper. "Ovette! Stop!" Ovette whipped her head around to face him. It wasn't hatred that creased her brow or contorted her features. It wasn't anger that ran tears down her cheeks. It was pain, the kind that ran deep, the kind that left scars that never fully heal, the kind you just learned to live with. He took everything from us. He took everything from me. The act of speaking opened the floodgates from what little Ovette had been able to hold back. You don't know what it was like. I believed him. He made me believe him. He made me hate you, all of you. He made me hate myself. She sobbed more than she spoke, the words a jumble of pitch and cadence. The flames engulfing the Lord Inquisitor crackled as she clenched her fist. The man spasmed on the floor, beyond screams now. Cal reached through her flames and grasped her shoulder. Teeth gritted against the fresh wave of searing pain. He's beaten, he rasped. He has nothing left. He's not a threat anymore. Ovette ignored his words. Cal softened his voice. If you kill him now, you'll set yourself down a path you might never come back from. He interlaced his fingers with hers. Trust me. For a moment, the hurt behind Ovette's eyes lessened, then flared with renewed purpose. Ovette, I don't want to lose you, too. The flames roared one final time before snuffing out. Ovette let out a cry of anguish, a shrill note that echoed through the grand hall before silence fell. She slumped to the floor, her body jolting with every dry sob, her breath coming in long, drawn-out heaves. Cal regarded the smoldering ruin that had once been the Lord Inquisitor. Sores oozed all over his ruined body. His blistered flesh was fused with his scorched armor. It would have been easy for Cal to hate him, to go against his own words and put an end to this pitiful existence. The Lord Inquisitor's chest rose and fell in quick succession. The architect of so much suffering now clung to the barest shreds of life. Ovette was right. This man deserved death for all the pain he had caused, the families he'd torn apart, the innocents he'd let die. But Cal knew the same could be said of himself. He'd killed, he'd torn families apart, he'd let innocents die, justifying his actions as noble purpose or rightful vengeance. Cal limped over to Corsius, grunting as he bent down to pick up his father's obsidian blade. Blank eyes offered Cal no answers, but he strained to remember anything he could. He saw a woman's warm smile, felt the safety of being wrapped in a blue bundle held by strong arms. Then he saw the orphanage, saw the prickly chin of an old man, grinning wide as he told stories. A little girl with a shock of white hair mewling because of a headache, her face buried in his shoulder any chance she got. Cal folded his father's hands around the obsidian blade's hilt, one above the other. He closed lifeless eyelids and whispered, Thank you. Oved's sobs had died down to tremors. Cal brought her to her feet, pushing away sweat-damp hair from her forehead. It's time, he said, gripping Hollowborn tight. Her silent nod was all the answer he needed. The walk to the chain stretched in the silent hall. The air hung still. The only disturbance was the rasping sounds of the Lord Inquisitor's breathing and their echoing footsteps. As they reached the base of the chain, Ovette raised her hands, conjuring her flames again. Cal watched, waiting for an ethereal tether to emerge. But nothing came. The chain stood silent. No runes or fastenings adorned the alien metal. For all intents and purposes, it looked like nothing more than a gigantic chain that vanished into the distant ceiling. Nothing's happening, he said after a pause, impatience creeping into his voice. What do we do? Ovette remained calm. She closed her eyes as white veins spread across her face. When she opened them again, they glowed a brilliant white, wisps of smoke curling from their corners. Hold up your hand. Her voice was distant, layered with something not her own. Cal eyed her for a moment, but obeyed. He held his blackened hand out toward the chain, and something twitched deep within him, a spark from some unfamiliar source. Again. Ovette's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Find it. Closing his eyes, Cal breathed slow and steady. He emptied himself of fear and pain, allowed his mind to wander. The spark flickered again, stronger this time. It was faint, something solitary that persisted within him. Focus on it, Ovette urged. Reach out. Find a connection. His conscious mind rebelled at the notion. Reach out with what? But this spark, this ember in the night, didn't sit within his conscious mind. The more he focused on it, the dimmer the spark became. But when he accepted it, guided it rather than forced it, the spark brightened. As it trickled through his body, familiarity took root. He'd felt this before. It felt capable. It burned as hot as his rage and filled him with the tenacity to endure. He nudged the spark to seek connection, as Ovette had instructed, and it wasn't long before he found it. Another presence brought a second spark cowering before the overwhelming light. That light, Cal realized, or felt, or believed, he struggled to tell which, was Ovette. The gift that flowed so easily through her shone like a sun beside him, smothering the spark with its radiance. The fear-filled spark noticed Cal's attention. It recoiled from him too. But why? He and the spark were the same. Ovette's gift burned bright, but theirs flowed dark and cool. Without warning, the fearful spark latched onto Cal, burrowing deep as if seeking shelter. Pain shattered his trance. He blinked his eyes open and saw Ovette's burning grip on his shoulder. He looked down and recoiled at the ethereal chain now tethered to his chest. Now, Cal! Ovette screamed, her voice taking on a measure of her own again. The spark inside of him panicked and tried to pull away, the ethereal chain straining after it. But he held tight. He wrapped his blackened arm around the chain's cold, shifting links and cried out as it tried to draw him in. Ovette raised his sword arm and placed her glowing white hands around Cal. Hollowborn flared to life with a matching radiance. With a grunt of effort, he thrust forward, plunging Hollowborn into the gigantic chain. The spark yanked and lashed out like a cornered beast as Cal poured all that he was into his blade. He thought of his friends, his family, the ones he loved, and the ones who had fallen to get him this far. The promises he'd made to Leif, to Shay, to Ovette. He fed his own spark into a roaring blaze and pulled with all his strength. Hollowborn screeched against the alien metal, cutting a clear swath through the connection. Sanctum's chain parted with a scream of gift. The fearful spark withered, outdone by Cal and Ovette's intensity, but not before one final, desperate pull. Cal had no time to react as the world lurched. Ovette's hand grasped his before they were falling, tumbling through a void, through flashes of blinding light, through to the other side. Uh-oh. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no. Oh yeah. All right, guys, are you ready for the final chapter here? We will get into the epilogue. I know you want it. I know you need it. Let's find out what the epilogue brings us. Epilogue. Her body ached. Every inch of her was sore and stiff. Her limbs were heavy, numb, and painful all at the same time. She tried to speak, parting cracked lips, but all that came were a series of raspy coughs that scraped her throat and sent a deep ache through her stomach. Even breathing required a struggle. She lay back, feeling soft blankets with something hard underneath. The caw of seabirds drifted in from the distance on cool air that tasted of salt. Her eyelids fluttered, resisting the command to open. Ah! This was about all she could muster. Another cough racked her, and someone pressed something damp and cool against her forehead. "You're awake!" A cheerful voice came from her right. She blinked against blurry vision, struggled to make out the figure leaning over her, messy hair obscuring his features. Cal? The name crawled from her throat, raw as it was. The blurry silhouette chuckled.
Figures he'd be your first thought.
The voice was familiar, one she'd journeyed with for many years. She'd even come to think of its owner as family, though she didn't say it aloud often enough. The damp cloth dabbed at her cheeks, patted down her throat. Calloused fingers brushed a strand of hair out of her face. She squinted against the light in the room, strained until the face resolved into focus. Artie? Artie's smile stretched wide, familiar and comforting.
Welcome back, Shay.
Rough dirt pressed against Ovette's cheek. Her senses snapped to attention, and what remained of her fight or flight response pushed her to her feet. She coughed against the dry air that filled her lungs. Rolling hills, barren of life, stretched in every direction, the cracked earth mirroring the parched sky. Dust swirled in what passed for wind. A body lay a few feet away from her. Its tousled black hair was matted with sweat. Its leather jerkin burned beyond use, and next to it lay a dark sword streaked with white. Cal! She scrambled over to him, cradling his head in her lap. Come on, Cal, wake up! She struck his face with her palm. Wake up! Cal groaned. His eyelids parted, straining against the relentless sun that baked the land beneath it. Where are we? He rasped as she helped him to his feet. Ovette scanned the horizon for a familiar landmark, but found none, save for Sanctum Spire looming in the distance, large cracks running through its stone faces. She reached for her gift, for the ever burning fire that she held inside of her, and found nothing. Where there should have been a roaring flame, she found emptiness, a persisting hollowness. Cal dropped to his knees, clutching his head. Sweat poured from his brow and sheeted his reddened face. Cal, what's wrong?
My head feels like it's about to split open.
He doubled forward and landed on all fours. His teeth were set harsh against the pain. Ragged shouting pulled Ovette's attention to a group of approaching men, clothed in rags more tattered and dirty than the miners of Igni. They brandished weapons with rugged, rusted, jagged edges, swords and spears that looked as though they'd been torn from the hull of an airship rather than fashioned in a forge. The leader inched forward, his lips chapped and bleeding, his weathered skin cracked and blistered with painful sores. He jabbed a spear in Ovette's direction.
What do you want? Why are you here? We no pay. We no pay dread.
Panic jerked his pitch as he spoke.
You go. You go.
Ovette held up her hands in front of her. We're not with the dread. We're lost. She stepped forward toward the twitchy leader, only to be met with jeers and more spear jabbing. We just need to find some shelter and some water. Can you help us?
Help us! Help us!
Someone from the group jeered. They pay! Another shouted. Despite his frame, the leader moved with alarming speed. He snatched hold of Ovette's wrist and pulled her forward. Get off! Let go of me! She shoved the wiry man to the ground with ease and brought her hand up. Again, her flames didn't answer. She tried again, pushed down harder, and called out to the dreamer. But there was nothing but silence in her. The wiry man sprang up to his feet and pounced on Ovette, butting her in the side of the head with his jagged spear. Her vision blurred as she toppled to the ground. Rough stones bit her cheek as several pairs of hands pawed at her arms and back.
No! Get off of her!
Cal's voice cried out, deep and guttural. He trembled as he stood, his skin flushed red, his blackened hand held out in front of him, heat shimmering in the air between his fingers.
I said, let her go!
A gout of black flame erupted from his palms, wild and hungry, engulfing the closest of the ragged group, reducing him to ash. The flames vanished as quickly as they'd come, and Cal fell face first to the ground. The ragged men screamed, abandoning their weapons and scrambling over each other in their frantic retreat. Ovette crawled to Cal. She rolled him over and cradled his head in her lap. He shivered despite the heat, his skin cold and clammy. Cal? The end of Book One of Gyfted by D.W. Lewis. About the author, D.W. Lewis. D.W. Lewis is a Welsh author, daydreamer, and lover of all things fantasy and sci fi. When he's not crafting worlds to immerse yourself in, or characters to fall in love with, you can find him trying his best to get through his ever increasing backlog of books and video games. He currently lives in Shanghai with his wife, Rui, lazy dog Leia, and mean cat Boyo. All right, everybody. Again, I told you it was going to be a little bit of a shorter stream than normal, but we have reached the end of Gyfted. So, once again, we will be starting the Sentinel project. Let me get up some information about it. The Sentinel project, which will be starting on Tuesday, by Soren K. Blackwood. I was wildly wrong with the name earlier. Soren K. Blackwood. So, let me grab something briefly. So if you guys are interested in checking it out, then you can go to here. This is the Sentinel Project by Soren K. Blackwood. You can find it on Amazon.com. Of course, as most of these books have been on Amazon.com. Dr. Ben Carter has spent his life chasing a theory his colleagues mock as genetic astrology. The idea that human memory can be encoded in our very bloodline. When his AI, Keats, finally isolates an impossible, intelligent sequence in a DNA sample, Ben's fringe science becomes the most important discovery in human history. But he is not the only one listening to the echoes of the past. Before he can share his discovery, Ben is silenced by the academic world and hunted by a clandestine military faction led by the formidable Major Vanguard, who has been guarding a similar secret for decades. Ben's only lifeline is Kalen Vance, the enigmatic director of a shadowy corporation who reveals a truth more incredible than he could ever imagine. A massive alien vessel lies dormant beneath the desert sands. Now Ben must race against a ruthless enemy to unlock the ship's secrets. Plunged into the memories of his ancient ancestors, he discovers the true, forgotten history of humanity. A story of a global network, a tragic civil war, and a mission that could either liberate humanity or erase it completely. To succeed, he must not only rewrite history, he must survive it. So we'll start that on Tuesday. I hope you guys will come along to join in. And of course, if you guys missed any part of our reading tonight, you can catch all of it at youtube.com/at Sir Arminius. I will be getting the chapters posted up there tonight. Thank you so much for coming along to spend some time with me as we read through Gifted over the last month or so. I hope you guys enjoyed the reading. And as well, I hope you guys have yourselves a wonderful rest of your weekend. I will be back Tuesday when we start the Sentinel Project by Soren K. Blackwood. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody, and I hope to see you guys all again really soon. Good night.